Well, the virus has now killed more than 100 people in China, and new cases have been confirmed around the world.
So you don't want to frighten the American public.
France and South Korea have also got evacuation plans.
But you need to prepare for and assume
strongly warning Americans to avoid all non-essential travel to China.
That this is going to be a real serious problem.
France, Australia, Canada, the US, Singapore, Cambodia, Vietnam, the list goes on.
Health officials are investigating more than 100 possible cases in the US.
Germany, a man has contracted the virus.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
Japan, where a bus driver contracted the virus.
Coronavirus has killed more than 100 people there and infected more than 4,500.
We have to prepare for the worst, always, because if you don't and the worst happens.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Welcome to War Room Pandemic. It's Wednesday, the 22nd of April, the year of our Lord, 2020. John Fredericks Radio Network, America's Voice.news, the streaming service of the Trump Revolution. That is now Dish Channel 219. Also Newsmax TV later in the day. FM 99.1, 103.9 in Chicago, throughout the world on Nexus.org, IRRS. Love getting your comments. The 250 million English-speaking people throughout the world that get that service. And also on G News, GTV later in the day, subtitled In Mandarin, blown through the firewall to the VPN. Jason Miller, Jack Maxey, Raheem Kassam. Going to have General Spalding on here today. So much breaking news overnight. President Trump just tweets out that he's going to be shooting every gunboat of the Iranians, of the Persians, out of the water in the Persian Gulf. In 1979, might have been 1979 or 1980, 1979, 1980. Lieutenant Junior Grade Stephen K. Bannon on the Combatant, the USS Paul S. Foster, DD-964, right there in the Persian Gulf. What were we doing? Getting target solutions on, guess what, Iranian gunboats. Okay, nothing changes. That's 40 years ago, 50 years ago, long time ago. Why are we there? Why are we there protecting Saudi oil? We'll get into that. Got General Spalding coming on the show. So much to get into today. And, of course, one thing we're going to talk about later in the show after the War Room Analytical Department gets totally up to speed. Jack Maxey, did 4,300 of our fellow citizens die yesterday of this virus? That's the official number that came up.
It depends whether or not we're including the deaths that they look backwards on from New York. So,
but I don't think you got to find out what the New York thing. The New York thing on that, it's not a one-day thing. It's not a back count. The back count's already happened. That is one day. They may be including people that died at home, which I think is only 180. So I ask you again, it's 4,300, right?
Reuters is saying U.S. deaths increased by more than 2,750 on Tuesday alone, just shy of the peak of 2,806.
Okay, so here's my point. Every day we're having Antietam. Whether it's 4,500, what's the count? Every day for the last 10 days, we've essentially had Antietam, right? The president sits up there and talks about the model, 60,000, how the actions of lowering the spread, right? All the stuff we've done, we've locked the country up, quasi, right? Some shelter in place. We're getting ready to unlock. We're going to get Jim Schultz from the White House counsel's office, one of the brilliant lawyer that worked with Don McGahn, to join us momentarily. But here's what I don't get. We're going to be at 60,000 on April 30th before any state opens. The official open is kind of going to be around May 1st, right? Governor Abbott, they're doing some this week, and Kemp may do some. We're going to get into this.
And later in the show, we'll get into the IHME has their new recommendations, and they've shifted the goalposts and the timing and all that. But it's May 1st is kind of the beginning of the season. But again, that Memorial Day weekend, Memorial Day, is really when the country overall will be up and going.
Here's my point, is over the last 10 days, and we've hit a plateau. Every day is Antietam. Antietam's the bloodiest day in American history. I guess 9/11 topped it by a couple hundred deaths. Those two. Every day we're around that. And the model, right now, we're going to be at 60 in the preseason. Before kickoff on May 1st of the grand opening, right? We're going to have some soft opens. We'll have a soft open maybe in Georgia, a soft open maybe in Texas, right? Some things. Some tattoo parlors and massage parlors in Georgia. Always glad we're opening. Got to open the tattoo parlors in the massage parlors.
How do you do a haircut from 6 feet away?
Well,
I'm growing I'm going to be like they used to have a ball club that played the Sons of David or whatever, grew their hair down to the middle of their back.
There is one small positive trend that the New York Times pointed out today, in that we've had massive increases in testing in the last, say, 10, 15 days, right? but the number of new positives is actually declining while the number of tests is actually going up.
That's the best thing we got.
We broke through 30,000 about 5 or 6 days ago, and now we're slowly declining out of that.
But that's the number one indicator. The number one stat I look at every morning is growth in tests versus growth in new cases,
right?
And that's trending. What is disturbing, regardless of how you're doing the cat, because that's just on the margin. Okay. We are now at a plateau, and it ain't coming down. We're at the second highest day yesterday, right? And if you count in the probables, which I honestly think the probables are real, if you count in the probables, you're at 4,700 yesterday. And the bigger breaking news is that California has now identified the two first ones are back in February 9th.
6th or
February
7th,
6th.
yeah.
And what you brought out the buried lead in that is that what? How do you have community spread when those are two old folks that had no contact with people from China? Correct.
So this is one of the
New York Times comes out with a story today that's got this thing's mutated, got 30 different mutations. The Nobel Prize winner in France says the other day that this thing go back to the IIT report, which we're going back to. We had it up on the third show. Dr. Hatfield didn't like it. He's saying, hey, there's zero probability. This is the guy that won the Nobel Prize for finding HIV, right? This is the pro from Dover in France. He says, I think there's zero probability this thing's natural. So for Media Matters and for everything like that, don't blame Steve Bannon. Go to the guy in France, okay? And go to the IIT report. He says, hey, the IIT report may have been wrong on the margins of some of their, but directionally, these are the guys that got it. And what did they say? They had something to do with malaria and something to do with HIV, some tinkering around this virus. My point, nobody knows nothing. We don't know nothing about this virus. A prominent Wall Street analyst, which I sent you guys, it's close, so I can't mention his name, really smart guy. He said what I've been saying, there ain't going to be a vaccine, okay? You better get used to a life. You better get very focused on a life that's got therapeutics, right? In NIH, we're going to get back to this later. NIH just carpet bombed Jack Maxey on hydroxychloroquine, and zinc too, right? They did both, a combo. Well, hang on. I'm just laying. You can defend. I'm just laying that. Not true. NIH. This was Fauci's department. Did Fauci just carpet bomb the president? Was that a hey, tough guy, you're lighting me up, and here's hydroxychloroquine?
Well, I mean, the bigger carpet bomb was Redfield's interview yesterday, where said that the second wave that's coming back this fall is going to be worse. I mean, that is and the buried lead on that, which again, I know this is so dumb, but the same reporter that wrote that, the same Washington Post reporter, Lena Sun, who was on the byline for that fake news WHO story, Redfield went and gave her a sit-down interview literally the next day after they wrote that BS WHO
They do a
story.
Direct hit on the president, and then you give the guy exclusive with the guy that everybody's trying to get. You get an exclusive.
And then you drop the news that, oh, yeah, hey, by the way, it's going to be way worse when we go into this winter.
Did anybody prep him before he went? Did they do question and answer like, hey, what's the second wave like? It's worse. Hey, you know what, Dr. Redfield? I don't think we're going to have that interview right now. Go back to the lab. Let's go back to the lab. And upon further review, you can't make this up.
How about if you go work on some tests?
Exactly. Hey, aren't you the guy that had the bad tests at first? The extraction agents. This is the other thing. Talking about tests. They keep saying on mainstream media, if you listen to the thing every night, one of the reasons they say, oh, it's made overseas. No, it's not made overseas. It's made in China.
I did some research.
It's made in China
last night with Hatfield on the reagents. Okay, the reagents are actually generally produced locally around the world because the transportation of them is very difficult. They have to be kept at minus 70 degrees. So they're generally transported in dry ice or transported in.
But the underlying API, the API is all made in China on the reagent. You don't have the ability to make the reagent here in the United States. I think he's technically wrong. Let's find that out.
I believe we do. I did a lot of research.
So who makes it?
Nobody has the capacity to make these reagents in the required quantities that are necessary for this.
It has to be made and kept in minus 70 degree.
Minus 70 degrees. So it's a pretty delicate.
You would think.
Right. And imagine right now, particularly what we have going on with the shutdown, you have to transport this stuff around the country like that.
I'm going to fight you on this one. I'm going to fight you in Hatfield. I love Hatfield. Hatfield's my guy. But you know what? I told him at the time, IIT is not in the business of getting things wrong. It's MIT. IIT is the India Institute of Technology. It's the MIT of India. Okay, 1.1 billion people. They all take math early. They're all geniuses. To get in there is like 100 times harder than MIT. They're not in the business of making big goofs. So when we saw the first report, remember, that was a big explosive thing, I think on February 4th or 5th. Hatfield was not totally dismissive, but hey, they had a calculation wrong, etc. The guy later, the French guy said on Thursday or Friday in France, hey, it's okay. Okay, we got so much to get to. We want to bring in Jim Schultz now. Let's go through. Here's the order of battle we want to do it. We're going to do immigration first because we had a tweet the other night. Jason Miller was all excited. He was skipping around, right? We're going to own the libs. We're doing this. Steve Bannon said, hey, what I'd like to do is come out to the podium and blow out big. Jason, and I always defer to Jason because he and Raheem are the war room. They're the guys that run it for a living. They're pros. I'm just, like the old Brits. I'm just a skilled amateur. Jason was, no, this is right. And then we had yesterday, Jason's a little deflated. He's walking around with a big, long face all afternoon, all evening. Okay, but I want to bring Jim Schultz in. Tell me, Jim, and Jim is former White House counsels under the first couple of years of President Trump's administration over there with Don McGahn, brilliant, with Cousins O'Connor now in Philadelphia. And one of the top lawyers in the country. He used to be a CNN contributor, along with Steve Cortez and Jason Miller. Are you still at CNN, Jim?
I'm still on CNN, Steve. Although they're not using me much these days.
Why? You're one of the smartest guys up there. Why are they not using? Why in the area that's got so much legal liability, so many issues, questions? They could use a big thinker like you. Why are you not on CNN more? Or why are you not CNN at all?
I think they want more doctors than lawyers at this point in time, Steve. That's at least that's what I'm hearing.
Okay, we're shifting quickly into the lawyer phase of this pandemic. I want to go to Jim. Let's talk about the immigration aspect first. We're going to bring you back after the break and discuss the rest. But talk about the immigration You ran through a number of executive orders when you were at the White House. Tell us what this thing really does, and it is as big a letdown as most people on the right think.
It's not going to include migrant workers, which are needed for farm work down south. I think you're going to have it's going to apply to green card holders only. So, it was a watered down version, no question, certainly constitutional. The president has plenary powers at this point in time without question. On top of that, we have the 2018 decision on the travel ban. So the president can really do pretty much what he wants in terms of, in and out of this country as a result of that decision.
You say plenary powers, and you're an expert because you used to be a governor's lawyer on this, I think in Pennsylvania. The National Emergency Act that he put in place about a month ago, the National Emergency Act, does that give him any additional powers?
He doesn't need any additional powers. The president's given broad powers as it relates to immigration. He doesn't need any more from the National Emergencies Act. He can pretty much do what he wants as it relates to immigration, as long as it has a rational basis, which is not a very difficult constitutional test to pass. So, look, the president can pretty much, like I said, do what he wants in this arena, and I think he's being responsible about it in terms of folks coming in with green cards.
Well, it's very watered down. When you say, what actually did he? It's only for 60 days. It's only for people in the process, right? For green card. I mean, it's very tiny what happened here, right?
Sure.
Okay.
I mean, look, this isn't immigration reform by any stretch. He isn't using this as a pretext for immigration reform. He's really trying to protect the country here. And I understand that folks out there want him to use these powers to shut down the immigration even further. But I think doing it in a way that's responsible, especially as it relates to the farming community, is pretty smart.
But it was about protecting American jobs. Hey, what, we got to take a commercial break. #WarRoomPandemic. #WarRoomPandemic. Want to hear your voice, observations. Tell us things we should be covering, things we're not covering well enough. Give us your ideas, your concepts. We're talking today about everything that's going on. Try to unlock the country. We're going to get back with the former White House counsel's office deputy, Jim Schultz, in just a second on all of our distribution platforms, now with over 6.3 million downloads in our podcast. Be back in a second.
War Room Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Live from Capitol Hill in Fort Defiance, the old Breitbart Embassy, right across the street from the Supreme Court, in a beautiful, stunning day in our nation's capital, the United States of the Federal Reserve. We'll talk about all that later. Raheem, you want to jump in here and continue the grilling?
Yeah.
Jim Schultz is our guest, the former White House counsel's office deputy.
And Jim, thanks for joining us. We'll have you even if CNN won't. There's a question here that's come in on the hashtag War Room Pandemic Twitter hashtag that we use, and it's, why are we getting a watered-down version of the immigration executive order? I can understand the pickers for farming, but what about the rest, and why only 60 days? Our economy will be in trouble for longer than 60 days. And I just want to read out the president's tweet as well to go with that from 2 nights ago. In light of the attack from the invisible enemy, as well as the need to protect the jobs of our great American citizens, I will be signing an executive order to temporarily suspend immigration into the United States. Jim, is 60 days enough, and why is this coming out as watered down?
Here, he put a pause. It's a 60-day pause, and I think that's very important to note here. To wait and see, put America's workers first, and then as 60 days ends, he can then extend that out if he wants to. Like I said, the president has wide discretion as it relates to immigration, and can extend this if he wants to, and broaden it as it relates to a broader population of folks.
So with the unemployment, we're shedding 1 million jobs a day. If he wanted to shut it down, the visas for tech workers that are competing against U.S. workers, he could do that? Because that's not done here, right?
He could do that if he wanted to, and he has, like I said, in this, especially at this time, and some scholars have likened this to almost war powers, where he has plenary authority, and I think Justice Thomas would probably agree here that he has tremendous powers above and beyond the flexibility he has with just immigration generally. At this time where we're fighting a war against this virus, his powers are even greater.
So there was talk yesterday in the White House press briefing room about a secondary executive order on immigration. A reporter asked, is that under consideration at the moment? The president replied, the secondary orders, yeah. Jim, do you have any insight into what the secondary order might contain?
Look, I think the secondary order is probably applying to a broader population here, and I don't think it's going to have anything to do with the 60 days. I think the 60 days is smart. Let's, for instance, if he wants to broaden it or tighten it, he has that ability after 60 days. What you don't want to do is, have to move the goalposts time and time again. People have some certainty as to timing, and then at those 60 days or leading up to it, he can make decisions. I'd hate to have something final. And then he'd have to go back on it.
I want to go now to opening up. One of the reasons we have you on here all the time, not only we're at the federal level in the White House and the White House counsel's office, you've also been on legal counsel to governors. Walk us through the 3 different models. People are confused. How are we actually? The president's devolved those powers right now to the governors to do. He set kind of overall guidelines. You've got Kemp in Georgia's got a plan. You've got Abbott in Texas. You have a couple of, I would say, non-plan in Pennsylvania. Walk us through first. What are the different plans, in high concept, and then what are the liabilities associated? We got a bunch of questions here coming from our entrepreneurs who listen to us about, hey, what are my liabilities if the governor set an overall kind of architecture?
So I think you have a very aggressive plan coming out of places like Texas, Georgia, perhaps Florida, as it relates to reopening, and the reason for that is to protect small businesses. The governors can make judgments as to what they feel is necessary in order to protect their population. I think it was very smart of the president to leave it up to the governors with some framework of guidelines around it.
Okay, so talk to us about what, like Kemp and Abbott. Do you think it's how dicey is it for particularly Governor Kemp is getting a lot of blowback of the tattoo parlors, all that? What are the liability? Is he taking care of and basically telling the business owners and tattoo parlors, massage parlors, the barbers, the beauty salons that he's taking the liability off them by setting these overall kind of guidelines?
I think the guidelines are just those guidelines. You are still going to have a plaintiff's bar that's going to be very, very aggressive in the wake of this virus and try to put the blame back on business like they do with everything else. And that's not to say that – and I think the courts are going to be able to sort this out in a way, in a very good way that, the governor has laid out – he's out guidelines. The businesses, if they follow those guidelines – will be found to be not liable at the end of the day for any damages sustained as a result of someone actually making a showing that they got the flu virus from going into one of those parlors. I mean, there's a lot of factors that go into that. Did the person practice social distancing? Were they wearing a mask themselves? Were they being responsible? So a lot of that comes back on the individual. There's no reason to put that on the businesses.
But is the small business owner going to be tied up in litigation here forever? I mean, walk us through the clarity of how if I've got a small cafe, right, and I've gotten some PPP, but that just takes me for a couple of weeks, right? I've got to open back up. They tell me I can't open up, and walk me through how I actually open up without being tied in litigation or having to have a 5-man staff outside putting temperature things on guys' foreheads and getting them to sign a release before they come in the cafe.
Look, I think you're going to, part of this is that businesses are going to have to operate as businesses do. And if we tie them up with regulations, they're not going to be able to accomplish their goals of serving the population and expanding the economy. So they have to be unshackled to a certain extent, and there has to be some insulation from liability. And I think part of that will come through the courts because it's very difficult to be able to prove causation as to someone who's out shopping and going to 3 or 4 different stores and then ends up with this virus, the COVID virus. It's going to be very tough to prove that they got it at that store at that time from someone in that store. So causation is going to be an issue from a legal perspective. But to say that the plaintiff's bar isn't going to take advantage of this, I think they will take advantage of this crisis, no question.
The insurance, we've said it for a long time. The insurance and the reinsurers are going to be the keys here. How important do you think it is for business owners to make sure? Because last night I saw Garagos was on TV in a great debate. We ought to try to pull that and play, not today, but it's maybe tomorrow. We get the insurance guys. He was debating. Garagos sued, basically went to his insurance company and asked for stop of business operations because of the pandemic. And they had the guy on there, I think from Sullivan & Cromwell, one of the top law firms that was representing the insurance company. He said, "Hey, tough break for a swell guy. Your policy says the following," and specifically in the policy he signed for business insurance, it had a paragraph in there. He's had this insurance for a long time. No viruses, no pandemic, nothing to do with. And this thing was written years ago. And the guy said, "Hey, we specifically carved that out." How big a deal do you think this insurance is going to be for all businesses, particularly for small businesses? Because the government's not going to give a blanket underwriting of this, are they?
No, and I think, look, it is going to be a big deal, and it's going to be very difficult for governments to try to break insurance contracts that have been entered into between private parties. And as Republicans, we don't want contracts to be abrogated between private parties. That's the wrong thing to do. But I think the state insurance departments who have regulatory authority over these insurers, there is no national insurance department, if you will, can set guidelines for policies and encourage the insurance companies to do the right thing here.
So if you're a small business owner, I want to go back to this one more time. What would be smart tips or smart things that you would be thinking through and doing? And let me give you an example. Like following the terrorist attacks of 9/11, we started seeing everywhere in the country start institute building sign-ins for these for high rises. Ostensibly, it's about security, but one of the main reasons for doing that is so people would know who was in a building, who wasn't in a building, for insurance and liability reasons. What smart tips or what things, if you're that small business owner that doesn't have the money to go and say, "I want to go and have a bouncer outside of my bait and tackle shop to go and do the temperature checks," what smart things should they be thinking of or instituting to try to avoid some of these?
Look, I think they just have to take the guidance from their governors and follow them, right? So if the governors require posting that folks that you must wear masks, or that if you've been in contact with anyone or found to have been in contact with anyone, that you're not welcome in the establishment. I mean, there's a number of things that they can post, but at the end of the day, people are going to be people. They're going to go in and out of stores. Maybe that trend changes a little bit in the wake of all of this, but I do believe that, and people's behavior will change, but I think it's largely going to be placed upon the American public and the people to be smart about it, and the business owners to be able to conduct business as they always have.
Okay, real quickly, we got about 60 seconds. The Attorney General in Missouri sued the Chinese Communist Party in the government of China yesterday, or is getting ready to. Give us your thoughts. Is this legit? Or other state AGs, would you recommend, if you were still at the AG level, would you recommend that the states start directly going after China?
Look, I think it's something that is a private bar and is a country, and as if I were advising attorneys general around the state, to take a hard look at China and the liability associated with it is a good thing. Now, these are long cases. I mean, our law firm's been involved in the 9/11 matter for all these years, Steve, and these cases take a long, long time to get to a conclusion. So I will say that I think it's a strong move for attorneys general around the country to be taking a hard look at China and coming up with theories of liability, if there's liability there, and I think a lot of folks think there is, that we should be taking a hard look at China and the companies in China that may have been involved in this issue, if there was negligence or perhaps recklessness associated with it.
We've got to bounce, but you've been on the 9/11 for representing those folks for what, 15 years, 17 years?
Yeah, it takes a long time, Steve. It takes a long time.
Okay, we're going to jump. General Spalding next on the war with China.
War Room Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Episode 132, live from Capitol Hill, over 6.3 million downloads into the podcast. Plus, we're ubiquitous everywhere. Somebody told me, I think we're getting today, it's 6.3 million downloads, but it's over 100 million views. The staff is coming up with the analytics, but they told me this morning, said, you keep saying 6.3 million downloads, but you're blown out everywhere. Facebook, YouTube, all the different platforms. I think we're going to be able to back that up tomorrow at 100 million views now on the War Room Pandemic. Number one show in China. Suck on that, CCTV. Suck on that, Xi and Wan Xishan, right? This is why your Pew number's so bad. You think your Pew number's bad in the United States, Xi? Check when we start doing some polling in China, right? We may start doing that. We may start getting the Chinese to start hitting us on War Room Pandemic and let us know. Want to get some good reports yesterday. We're going to actually reach out. We're going to start having some of the people from War Room Pandemic, hashtag War Room Pandemic, actually come on. Some of the viewers, guy in New Zealand was amazing. Somebody did a 9-part series on America 1.0 versus America 2.0. You guys are on fire. Now, I want to get to it. A great American patriot. This is on the geopolitics side. Remember, folks, we're at war. The Chinese told us in unrestricted warfare, information/cyber, economic, and kinetic. Those are the 3 types of war, okay? We're at an information cyber war now. We're at a hot economic war. Let's hope it doesn't get to a kinetic war. But that's what the gunboats in the Iranian and the Persian Gulf are. That's the kinetic war. You see them in the South China Sea. The Chinese we're all over it right now, steaming around where the Chinese say it's their waters. They're sending bombers over Taiwan. They're over in the East China Sea. Unrestricted warfare. The Vietnamese say the Vietnamese government says, hey, guess what? Yeah, we hacked the Wuhan P4 lab. What are you going to do about it? Tough break for some swell guys, and we're going to do it again. That's cyber information war. New York Times reports that whole thing that went around in February. Remember, everybody's blowing our phones up that, hey, we hear the president's going to lock down the country tomorrow, and it's National Security Council. Turns out that might be Chinese information warfare. Might have been Chinese bots. The other day, somebody's talking about the Chinese getting on Facebook, taking all the ads out against Trump, doing stuff about Trump, political warfare. Not Russia. The committee votes Russia. Russia's a sideshow. Ukraine's a sideshow to a sideshow. Okay? The main event, the main thing is the CCP, now an American hero. Unrestricted warfare is a little too complicated, a little too deep for folks, and I don't say that to denigrate your intelligence. It's just it's a very difficult book to get through. It's like Clausewitz, very difficult. For those that are professionals or for those that want to tackle it, go ahead and tackle it. It's like $50 now. But if you want to understand it, it used to be the 100-year marathon, but Pillsbury's gotten a little weak on us. Dr. Pillsbury, weak, keeps going on CNN and keeps going on Lou Dobbs and Bannon's a super hawk, right? Super hawk. Let's take down CCP. You're damn right. Okay, stealth wars. One of the great patriots in our country, General Robert Spalding, Brigadier General, B-2 pilot, was the smartest guy in the White House. We had a lot of smart guys, by far the smartest guy. And you can either hear Spalding talk about the geopolitics of what's going on in this war, or you can read The Economist. But The Economist, this is weak tea, and they're supposed to be the smartest guys in the world, the geopolitical consequences of COVID-19. If you want to see, on the 150th or 200th anniversary, the 100th anniversary of The Economist, I debated the editor-in-chief of The Economist in New York City in front of a packed house. No offense, I bench pressed her, right? Just not, it's just not even close. She's very nice and she's great, and I love The Economist, but you're just not. We're bringing in heavies like General Spalding. For our radio audience, can't see it, I'm holding up Stealth War. It's his book. You don't need to read Unrestricted Warfare. Read the American version of it, which is General Spalding's Stealth War. You got to get this book. This book will explain everything that's going on. So General Spalding first, and I want to mention, before we get into your analysis of the geopolitics, I saw that General McMaster's coming out with his book now. I forget the title of it, but he starts with a piece. They do an excerpt for the book in The Atlantic. And it's about General McMaster's whole strategy of China, and China's the bad guys. We've got to focus on China. Memory serves me. Correct me if I'm wrong. You were in the National Security Council when General McMaster's was there. You were, I thought, the smartest guy there. I don't remember General McMaster's really talking much about China at the time. In fact, he was, we got to stay in Afghanistan. We got to get more troops in Afghanistan. He's the guy, we got to be bombing Syria. Oh, the Russians, we got to be up there getting on the Russians. We got to be more in the Middle East. We need more troops, more commitment. Afghanistan, more. General McMaster's never had a correct answer for anything. But one thing I don't ever remember General McMaster's ever mentioning China, except to say Bannon and Navarro and Pottinger and Spalding and all these kooks, right, that keep trying to press China, they're kooks. What say you, sir?
Well, I remember, being in the National Security Council, and we had a meeting, and I was explaining one day how sovereign bonds, Chinese sovereign bonds, were being sold in Hong Kong, and how we could expect that we were going to see hundreds of billions of dollars moving to China when that happened. And I remember him looking at me like, what are you talking about? And, it's just an indication of the different levels of national security. He's very much more focused on the military, where I was much more focused on the economic and the financial influence of the Chinese Communist Party. So there was a definite, I think, misunderstanding, and I think President Trump, actually understands this probably better than anybody in the bureaucracy today.
Oh, he understands. President Trump totally understands the economic warfare part of it, and the information warfare part, and the kinetic. He understands. But it was look. I know you're a general. You're a good man. You're one of the best guys I ever met, smartest guys I ever met. I'll back off McMaster's for this episode to get your thoughts. But McMaster's is a moron. He's the kind of guy who goes on Morning Joe. All the Morning Joe guys. You know the thing about Morning Joe? They keep yammering on. We got to hold Morning Joe accountable for all their bad calls. All the national security, the conventional wisdom that's buried us over the last 20 or 25 years is the conventional wisdom you see on Morning Joe with David Ignatius, Richard Haas, Admiral Stavridis, all of these clowns. They got all the degrees. They work at all the think tanks. They're all a set of clowns, right? It's a clown show. This is what got buried in Afghanistan, the $2 trillion in Afghanistan, and continuing on that policy is all the McMasters. No, McMasters never mentioned China. That article in the Atlantic excerpt from his book is ridiculous. He never talked about China. He didn't want to talk about China. His focus is Russia, 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 Russia. Fiona Hill, big masses. Russia, 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 Russia. What did President Obama say to Romney? The 1980s are calling and they want their foreign policy back. Okay? It was all China. And General Spaulding, that was who he was in. General Spaulding, so set the stage to us today. Stealth, unrestricted warfare has got an information war, economic war, kinetic war. Where are we with the Chinese Communist Party in the Third World War that is upon us? This is 1938. Where are we right now?
Well, I think we're probably actually somewhere around 1944, actually. They've got their foot on our throat, and we're essentially being choked out. And so, this coronavirus really has shown their power in all three areas of that, of what you just talked about. Particularly, we're seeing in the kinetic now as they're beginning to, surge in the South China Sea, surge in the Taiwan Strait. So they're showing you that they have the power now to begin to change the world order.
So walk us through that. You've shocked me. I'm not going to be able to sleep tonight. I'm saying 1938. We still got a shot, right? They're the Nazis. It's the increase. We've had Austria. We got Czechoslovakia. Got all that. But hey, they're not bombing. They're not bombing London yet. You're telling me we're in 1944, and they're winning. Walk us through. How are they winning on information war, and how are they winning on economic war?
So if you think about it, just go back to World War II. Essentially the Germans tried to fight on too many fronts at once, and we're doing the same thing. We're fighting on too many fronts at once. The president was trying to get out of the Middle East. We're being bled out in the Middle East. Of course, we have this economic warfare going on, and we're actually being bled out by our own Wall Street and our own corporate interests. And so we're losing on so many fronts, and what we need to do is shore up, focus, and prioritize, and we ought to prioritize in the Chinese Communist Party. Now, we are losing, Steve, you know this, we are losing in the corporate sector. We have no industrial capacity in the United States to speak of. That underpins our ability to produce the kind of weaponry that we have to use in the Indo-Pacific, which we don't have. We were part of the INF Treaty, which prevented us from developing intermediate range ballistic and cruise missiles, which the Chinese have thousands of in the region. They're pumping out a surface combatant every 6 weeks. So not only are we losing on the economic front, on the industrial front, but of course, as you know, as this pandemic was growing, they were surging on the social media front. So they were sending out text. They were sending out social media posts to essentially inflame the fear here in the United States, to have us lock down the economy even further. And now you see the Russians and the Saudis essentially collaborating to destroy our energy industry. I mean, it is a full court press around the globe to destroy the United States economically, socially, politically, and they have the power now in the Pacific to do it militarily as well.
The Pacific is the fulcrum. Remember, the control of the Eurasian landmass. He who controls the Eurasian landmass controls the world, as Mackinder told us in Mahan. I want to go back briefly, General, to Saudi Arabia and Russia. Correct me if I'm wrong. This is MBS and Putin going gangster on us. We've been working and talking to the guys in the fracking industry. This primarily and principally was who was going to be the lead supplier to the Chinese empire, and the first thing they had to do was destroy the American oil and gas industry. Are we too over the top when we say that?
So you're not. I'll tell you why. We have the Great White Fleet coming right now to the United States full of oil. The Saudis have sent 20 super tankers full of oil. So at this time when we have structural slowdown of the energy industry, they're basically flooding the U.S. market with oil in order to destroy so many of our energy companies. When we come out of this, most of them will be bankrupt. I mean, it's a brilliant move.
What do you agree that we should? Why are we have Lieutenant J.G. Bannon 40 years ago or 45 years ago, 50 years ago, came to do the math, was in the Persian Gulf on a destroyer. Why are we in the Persian Gulf today looking at shooting at Iranian Persian gunboats? What are we defending over there?
I asked myself that. I don't know what we're defending anymore. We had an energy industry that said that we could pull out of there and we could probably reorient our military towards the Pacific. But, it's been absolutely impossible to get this town, Washington, D.C., from coming out of the Middle East. We're still stuck on a 20th century national security policy.
General Spaulding, we got to jump. Tell people how they get your Twitter feed, your website. You've got to read Stealth Wars, How China Took Over While America's Elite Slept. It's a must read. How do people get access to you?
GeneralSpaulding.com, and they can follow me on Twitter at Robert_Spaulding. I'm on YouTube at General Spaulding.
General Spaulding, thank you very much for joining us today on War Room Pandemic. We're going to have a lot more Spaulding. Great man. Spaulding could be making literally tens of millions of dollars as an advisor to hedge funds. He's not. He's dedicated his life as an American patriot, having served in the military for, 25 or 30 years. He's dedicated his life to this war against the Chinese Communist Party. We take a short commercial break. War Room Pandemic. We're going to get the feedback from the team when we come back to the War Room at Fort Defiance on Capitol Hill in just a minute.
War Room Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Wednesday, the 22nd of April, year of our Lord 2020. Welcome back to the War Room. We got a lot to go through. I want to catch up. We got other news breaking. We got so much stuff going on. I want to go back to Schultz. Here's the question for our audience, particularly for you patriots that are going to be out protesting everywhere. And we're going to have Jenny Beth Martin, Steve Moore, and Adam Braden on in the next couple of days and through next week. They're one of the groups putting this together because we want to make sure their voices are heard and we understand exactly what's going on. Is it defined enough here's what we can't have. We can't have an open. We already have a crush in aggregate demand. Now we have a crush in demand destruction. They're two different things. Loss of aggregate demand because something happened in a period of time, boom, it's got periodicity to it. Demand destruction where it doesn't come back, okay? You see this in oil and gas industry. But if we don't do this right, the little bit of money, and look, it comes up to trillions of dollars, the little bit of money that we forced into the system through PPP and to save the small businesses is not going to matter if the open's not done right, because you're going to have businesses with too much cost, you're not going to have any other safety net, and you're going to have all the liabilities. Is this been defined enough by the White House to give guidance enough to these governors that it's not herky-jerky and can come after you hear what Jim Schultz has to say?
Well, there are kind of two schools of thought about this. One, the short answer would be no. And to make it very clear what people at home want to know right now, everyone's going stir crazy. Even the most hardcore of the shut it down, we need to make sure that we're safe, we're ahead of the curve. The media's asleep at the switch. They're chasing stupid stories on impeachment. We're worried about this global pandemic. People want to know when their lives can get back to normal. Yep. They want to know what the impact is going to be on kids if they're out of school then for an entire calendar year, not just simply one semester. They want to know if Big Ten football is going to come back in the fall. And they want to know if their own business, if they can go back and have a job. These are the things. So we're seeing these startling numbers right now. Pew Report saying 43% of Americans have lost their jobs or wages. Rasmussen saying 40%, saying immediate family member out of work. But the whole point of this money being pumped in was to be a bridge to get us past this point. The question now is, does that bridge connect to the other side? Is this being opened up? And so some people say, hey, this is a matter of it's smart what President Trump is doing. Let's have it at the states. Different states, they're impacted in different ways by coronavirus, can have different standards and smart reopenings. You see things like Georgia where the media is jumping on and pummeling right now saying, why the heck do you have tattoo parlors open? You know, how does that fit into the mix of safety? I mean, just, I don't know, just the whole notion there. That's kind of easy thing for media to jump on. But there are other people saying, hey, guys, you're overcomplicating this. You're making this way too complicated, getting into the details and the liabilities. This is all about testing. If you have the testing, then people are going to feel comfortable and confident to go back out there. Then, of course, you have whether it's for coronavirus or the antibodies, the whole hornet's nest when you get into that. But those are kind of the two prevailing debates right now.
what's the phrase that's always used? Laboratories of democracy.
Yes.
And then we've got laboratories of, how we fight this virus or come back from this virus that's going to be out right now. Let's be clear about something. Nothing's clear, right? And here's the thing. You're going to see this get more complicated as well. Steve, you always say that every casket has a lawyer. Actually, every sneeze is going to have a lawyer, okay? Let's be clear about that. And the other part of it is...
That's genius.
That's true.
And that's so good, I'm stealing it.
and here's the other thing as well. And Jack, I'm on your side on this, right? There's going to be complication and hard times in the future. There's just no avoiding it. I mean, forget even about a second spike. You're talking about something that nobody's done before in this kind of way, in this kind of fashion, with this kind of rush. It's just we have to gird our loins for the pain of this.
Well, I think one of the things also, and it was brought up very well by General Spalding, and Steve brought it up at the start of the show, you see the way that the Chinese use their propaganda tools through social media and everything else. So I think to a certain extent, there may have been a kind of more panic than we might have had if we had more time.
That's nonsense. That's nonsense. That's total nonsense.
What I'm saying is...
answer the question. No, you want to get off the question. You want to go back. No, answer the question about opening up. Let's talk about opening up. You want to pivot back. You want to pivot back to the Chi-Coms. Look, I'm the first guy I want to get on the CCP. But let's stay.
If you want to answer the question about opening up,
okay.
We are in a war,
and you're saying the Chi-Coms have got us mentally.
The ground commanders are the governor. The president is the commander in chief.
Okay, I'm with you.
You know what? I let my commanders in the field, in their district on the battlefield, make their battlefield decisions about how best to fight that insurgency in their geography.
Look, let's get away from the idea that there won't be mistakes here. And there's also more complication in terms of suggestions coming out. This Israeli study showed that actually they think that states should open up for 4 days and then cycle out staff and have a different staff for the next week and then cycle those staff back in. This is going to get very complicated.
That's what I want to go back to Jack in the field commanders thing, because you're right. The federal government sets over a policy. The governors manage, as we said. The guys at the deck plates are the county supervisors and the mayors. Cuban brought up the other day, very first thing he said when he says, hey, if you set out the overall rules of the game, American entrepreneurs will figure it out. The French have a saying, I think, first engage, then figure it out, right? In what the governors are doing, do you think is the ground commanders, and there are 50 different laboratories, is there enough guidance from Kemp, from Abbott, from Michigan, from Pennsylvania, from Cuomo to actually have the entrepreneurs then go do it where you're not going to blow your business up?
I think there's a set of factors that various governors are looking at that aren't necessarily being looked at from the national level. One of them, I think, is particularly in flyover country, you're watching the collapse of the medical system out there because of lack of surgeries, lack of patients, lack of customers. And so these factors will have long-term consequences for many of these states out there in the middle of nowhere. And I think that the governors have to look to their own state's future as well as their partnership with the future of America. So I give them a lot of room to make decisions for their own. And particularly, I think this is very important. I respect any governor who will take the responsibility for making a decision. So far, one of the worst things that I've seen is we have a committee of scientists who are making all the decisions, and really without any clarity
the school nurses.
You know, and part of this, too, is just, look, there are some good governors, and there are some duds. I mean, I have full confidence the governor, Mike DeWine, you could put that guy into any kind of battlefield situation, and he's going to help lead Ohio through. I mean, he's done a great job, in my opinion.
In Abbott.
In Governor Abbott.
Yep.
There's some governors, they're kind of dummies. I just personally think that, look, Governor Kemp in Georgia, I'm not putting him in either category, but I'm saying if he just very basically said, okay, we're not going to reopen beaches, we're not going to reopen tattoo parlors right now, 90% of this coverage wouldn't be there.
Okay, we'll take a short commercial break. We'll come back, and for the next hour, we're going to start with Jack Maxey. He's going to walk us through if the rules have an incredible cost for the new companies opening up, what's going to happen, plus worldwide famine coming next on War and Pandemic.